Hello YouTube, this will be a overall build guide for Okina Prime Incarnon, and I'll preface this with a few things, just given the nature of my channel that is almost exclusively on Excalibur content and some melee content, so sort of eliminate this as a variable. This isn't specific to Excalibur or any version of Excalibur, and I think to demonstrate that, I'll do a channel first, which is showing gameplay on Kullervo, because this is really good on Kullervo as well. What I think is the best thing to mention off the rip is some of the variables here. So I don't think doing it on Okina Incarnon, base Okina, is worth it. Just go right into Okina Prime. And rivens in general aren't that useful, and I'll demonstrate that with a pretty good riven that is marginally better than another mod. To get right into it, I think what I'll do is high-level discussion about the way the Incarnon form works. So when you proc the Incarnon form, when you generate kills, which appear to require direct damage from melee, like you'll generate these Spectral Daggers, because the Spectral Daggers that therefore will generate like 5 or 6 of them and then auto-target enemies within about 10 meters. They don't proc more Spectral Daggers, so you can't get this like super critical reaction of daggers proccing more daggers. You do appear to have to cast, or actually have to do direct damage to an enemy with melee attacks in order to proc this. It doesn't proc off of things like slash dash, but it doesn't get eliminated by things like slash dash, which is where there's some nice interactions with Excalibur and some other Warframe, but because largely my channel focuses on Excalibur, I'll cover some of the natures of that. So if you pull out Exalted Blade and you have Spectral Daggers, it doesn't decast them. If you go and transfer in and out of Umbra with his sentience enabled, it doesn't like remove those. So there's no real negative interaction. There's pretty much only neutral interaction with his sentience passive and the Spectral Daggers. He doesn't appear to generate Spectral Daggers when he gets kills, but he doesn't get rid of them, and he will, whatever daggers are around him when you transfer into Operator will in fact work with him. So there's some cool interactions here that make it a really good option on Excalibur, and I'll cover some of that when we get into the more detail on the Incarnate evolutions. Obviously the stats here, bonuses, are actually pretty good. It's not movement speed, but if you're familiar with some of the Incarnate evolutions, and we'll show them that you do actually get innate movement speed here. So getting into some of the other evolutions, I prefer this combo generation over the not really that great in comparison to modded status damage. So the things I find generally the best on Incarnons for melee is you want your evolution 2 to be some sort of combo generation. You want your evolution of 3 to be a way to maintain that combo generation. And then you want your evolution 4 to be some sort of heavy stat bonus. And there's some variability here, there's some variability here, but I really don't think this synergist, Surti, however you say that, is really that great, because this isn't going to prevent you from modding in like Galvanized Elementalist. So and then stat-wise, it only goes up to 30%. I don't really find it as useful as basically being able to guarantee getting to 12 by 220 pretty quickly, as long as your enemies aren't too squishy, because you can run into that problem on lower level missions, even with this, where you just kill enemies too fast to actually, because they have to have status on or slash on them before you hit them to generate the combo. Noting that this is a slash heavy weapon and synergizes nicely. It also synergizes nicely with something like Radio Javelin, since when you Radio Javelin, you'll apply slash and it'll proc this when you go to melee them. This one has probably the most subjectivity to it. So I like the movement speed, because this does work when you have Exalted Blade out. It doesn't magically go away when you cast Exalted Blade, and this is sort of disappeared in the background. But this is also a very valuable option, even on Excalibur, because if you pull out Exalted Blade, this triggers. So you can always have 12 by 220 in the background, or if you run in a scenario where you don't see a lot of enemies for a while, you don't want to lose your combo, you can pull out Exalted Blade. It'll sort of like pause or snapshot your combo, and then when you see enemies again, you can decast Exalted Blade and then go right back to having 12 by 220. It does pause the current combo duration, so be careful how when you do that, you don't want to do it with like half a second left, because it's going to disappear as soon as you decast it. The range here The range on Incarnate Evolutions is pretty poor in general. I would just ignore it. So this is really the subjective one. This is part of why I think overall this was one of the best melee weapons in the game, because you can run this feature. If you wanted to run Excalibur with a primary and secondary and then just sort of play him like a normal person and not melee only, this will do a great job at just letting you generate combo in the background just from quick melees or just from even tandem bond, and then just have 12 by 220 in your back pocket the whole time, buff slash dash. If you're curious about how the specifics of that work, I do have a lot of videos covering over slash dash and how to maximize that. This one is, I think, the most situational. So you notice I'm running the plus status chance, which I generally find better, even when you're not running something like Wrathful Advance. And the reason being is that if you look at the base stats of this, so if we go back to here, like the status chance is where it somewhat lacks, but sometimes this +2 on crit chance is really useful, because if you do the math, and this is just a general rule of thumb for crit chance mods on melee weapons, 32% is kind of like this really sweet spot, because if you do the math on like Blood Rush and Galvanized Steel, you get to like a very nice crit chance break point when you're at full combo. The reason I'm running this here is because there's a way around that at 30%, which is pretty much just either having a Riven with crit chance on it or running Gladiator Might. If you have the mod slot free to run Gladiator Might, I would recommend running this. And you want your sum additive or your sum multiplicative crit chance to be like 660% approximately, whether that's with Gladiator Might or a Riven, in order to really reach that breakpoint. Otherwise, this +2 scales really well. If you don't have the mod slot to add in that extra 110%, then this is what I recommend for that. The status duration bonus here is really not a focus point. Like 6 seconds status chance is plenty already with most of the game works now in time to kill. So getting into the builds, and I will showcase a couple. One thing I'll make clear, I don't run influence on this very often. I don't think it's that great. I don't think it's an influence host, but I don't think it's one of the better ones, and there's some cooler interactions that you can get here. So the thing to note about this, and I'll recap this because I don't think I covered it. So the innate cold damage of the Spectral Daggers does in fact combine. It'll proc on its own, so you can get cold, but then it'll combine if you have some sort of available combinational element, whether when you're talking like toxin, heat, cold, electric. So you get kind of the benefit of them, and that's where I would recommend generally, if you want to be able to maximize your status damage type on this, running some sort of non-combinational element, at least base. Like if you run a combinational, just add something else in there so it can combine with it. But is it really necessary? No. I think innate toxin with a setup like this is flexible, but just with how often I cast abilities on most of my Warframe builds, including the Kullervo build I'll show, this is just really powerful. 240% melee damage or elemental damage is just absurd, especially if you have a little bit more melee damage like I do have here. Just note here, this is a great example of our rivens really aren't that great on this. If you look at the difference between this and a pretty crazy riven, this is ever so slightly lower stats. Obviously, you get the 2 times on heavy attacks, which does matter a little bit more than 110% from combo. But you really only get 105% melee damage on this versus this. It's where I don't really think it's that necessary. If you didn't want to run a riven, sort of talk about this, where if you don't have some sort of outsourced source of attack speed, I think attack speed scales really well here. You want some sort of attack speed. But if you don't have a source of that, like Warcry or Arcane Strike or Wisp or whoever, then mod in some of that. Otherwise, this slot, if you do have a source of outsourced attack speed, just throw this puppy in there, and then you can reach the same breakpoint that I do when it comes to the 30% base crit chance. All right, going back to the build I'll actually show gameplay on. The stances here are a bit a bit weird. So this Gnashing Pariah, Payara, whatever, is probably one of the best stances on PC. And the reason being on PC specifically, and mouse and keyboard, I'll even specify in greater detail, is if as long as you figure 8 with this, you can keep the forward momentum type, like the forward neutral attack, and it's really good. But as soon as you stop and you do the neutral attack just sucks on it. And the nature of a controller is that you can't really figure 8 like you can on mouse and keyboard on this, because of your ability to like aim your camera. I've never really gotten it to work well on controllers, so that's something to consider here. If you're on PC, I highly recommend getting good at gnashing at this stance than running some of the other ones. But if you're on console, I would experiment with it and find which one works best for you. Getting into the rest of it, I've just adding some sort of range really helps here. Obviously, your combo generation, this guy. Condition overload, even when I'm running plus melee damage on the Riven, I find this to be worth the mod slot, because you think you're priming up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 from the Spectral Daggers, and the ability to get cold and viral out of it. And then 7, because melee exposure. So you have a lot of status damage type variety here. There's some more interesting stuff you can run, like this guy, where you can get some pretty crazy crit damage once this scales all the way up. This gets pretty good with Weeping Wounds, but as Doughty works in general now, it's not that great. Do you need Puncture on the Riven? I don't think so, but just keep in mind that this is an option. If you do happen to get a plus Puncture Riven, then this can work pretty nicely. But do you need it? This could get easily dropped and replaced by one of the Puncture mods, and you know, scale a little bit better than it, especially if you're outsourcing attack speed somewhere. Obviously, an influence setup is almost exactly the same, except with a different elemental damage type. If you don't have Voltaic, this probably scales just as well. Sometimes calculating out the crit or the status chance to see what the weighing is worth it, but if you don't care that much, then you can run either one of them. It really doesn't matter that much. And I showed this already, which is sort of a no Riven variation that I thought I'd demonstrate here. Okay, so that pretty much covers Okina Prime and the builds. And what I will show, though, is something you guys probably haven't seen, and I have alluded to it. I won't really get too deep into the build design of this, because I don't play it. I play it frequent, but I don't play it frequently enough, I think, to speak authoritatively on it. But this is what I run for it, because it's quite interesting. I think there's really fun interaction with the way that battery works on Kullervo, and the fact that he's overguarded, so then you don't have to worry about prime sure-footed. You don't have to worry about getting hit with a heat status effect and then dropping half your max energy. So then you're able to get his max energy some pretty high level, including after you get Warcry up, which gives you even more armor, which then gives you even more energy. You don't get that benefit with preparation, but you know, you're already getting 1200 base energy, so who cares at that point? It's the idea of you don't need energy economy if you have like 1500 max energy and you're starting off with 1200. And then fun interaction with, a lot of people might not do this, and I think it's kind of a sin against Kullervo with how good his base health and armor is, that you run triple Umbral on him. Yeah, you pretty much have to put in at least 2 Umbral Forma, or at least one, at minimum at least 1, but I think 2 if you look at the stats here. Yeah, you need at least 2. No, you could probably just run it with 1, because I don't have this polarized. So it's just something to keep in mind. And then the combination of these two, you get 72 strength right off the rip, non-conditional. This is a really just easy build here that I will demonstrate with my Okina setup on. So keep in mind, this is just my exposure toxin build for it. And I think I'm running my crit kitty here. Yeah. Okay. Some things I didn't cover, or I might have not covered, I don't know, we'll find out, is some of the interactions with Excalibur while we get to start some gameplay here. Some of the interactions with Excalibur, so it doesn't break with slash dash, which is really nice. So if you get a bunch of melee kills, you slash dash around. The spectral daggers are still there. They still hit enemies. There's a positive interaction there. And then there's really no negative interaction, and I would say slightly positive interaction with Umbra. So with Umbra, you don't lose your spectral daggers when you don't lose your spectral daggers when you go in and out of sentience. I think that's a really important thing to know. But he doesn't generate them. So whatever you go in there with is what he'll be able to use and then run out. So thing to keep in mind with Kullervo right here. So you might have noticed I didn't have range on this build. So when the volatile recompose augment came out, one thing I did was I dropped range on Kullervo in order to get that augment. And the important thing to note here is you don't want your recompose range to be less than the 10-meter range on spectral daggers, because you could run into a scenario where your enemies die before collective curse can or recompose, can actually hit them, and then you don't generate enough overguard because your enemies are just dying from that. So you just notice how kind of dumb this build is. Pretty brainless. Pretty nice. And then if you wanted to combine these guys, the Spectral Daggers will show this. So we'll link these guys together. Get some melee kills here with it. And you notice it does interact positively with your collective curse. So you can tell I'm kind of a bad Kullervo player because I don't play this that often, at least not recently. But I don't think you have to try too hard with your pride. I think thematically too, he's got his daggers, he's got spectral daggers going around him from Okina. I think it's a really cool interaction. It's where I think thematically it works quite easily. I just tried to slash dash that target. This is one thing I forgot to demonstrate. Forget if... we'll try this. Life support on the way. Forgot if his passive heavy attack efficiency adds to negative rivens. Since my riven has negative heavy attack efficiency on it. Not a problem on Excalibur, but suboptimal on Kullervo. If you're using his Wrathful Advance as actual heavy attack, which I generally don't do. As you can see there, I messed that up. The other interaction here, as you notice, so he does get slash. He does proc slash with his abilities. I'll show that. So like this does proc slash. So then you do get the positive interaction here of being able to proc slash on a target before you melee them and generate combo off of it. This also generates combo, so it's a nice little synergy with them. I think overall, Okina Prime Incarnon was kind of built for him, is kind of what it feels like. It's kind of built for Kullervo, but I don't think it works negative. It works really well with any pseudo-exalted because of the way it interacts with, or any former pseudo-exalted, except for slash dash still being a pseudo-exalted. So unlike Dual Liquor Clouds, I probably mentioned this, but unlike Dual Liquor Clouds, those don't benefit from Wrathful Advance, but these do. You can see they're critting, triple exclamation point critting, and Acolytes stand no chance. Kitty treating me well. Thanks, Kitty. I'll just fall to recompose. Now, as a reminder, this isn't a build guide on Kullervo, but I thought I might as well show something different other than Excalibur for once in a blue moon. Something that I do a lot of testing on things like melee Warframe, Garuda, Kullervo. Just give me a little more robust of an opinion on what is available out there, but as I mentioned, I don't think I play this enough to speak authoritatively on it.
It is done, Tenno.
So I'll go back to the arsenal and give a little recap. I think more clearly demonstrating or discussing the ability interactions, I think is warranted here. So to go back over with Kullervo, you get some nice synergies between like this evolution and its ability, this ability to proc slash. You don't want the range of, like, you have to be careful with the range. So like the radius of this is 8 meters. If your enemies are all dying before you're able to get this to proc, that used to be a problem with his ult without running volatile recompense. So that's something to keep in mind. I would highly recommend running that augment. It seems volatile recompense is pretty much required on him now. It interacts positively with Collective Curse, and I think subsuming off his 4 for Roar Cry, or even like you could run like Thermal Transfer on him, I think is a really good option, since you generally get a free mod slot here, like with Eternal War. Going back into Excalibur, because this is largely an Excalibur channel, positively interacts with Slash Dash. This will, the daggers won't generate from it, but they'll be able to hit targets and prime them ahead of you, which is really nice. It scales really well with something like Warcry, so if you're running a Warcry variation, which usually what I've been running with this is just my Warcry variation. This is one of the very few scenarios where running Umbra is not as advantageous, but you can run Vazarin or Unaru for this either way. And then getting into the Exalted Blade, just quick showing this is my sort of hybrid setup where I can use Exalted Blade because I like having that as a little bit more versatile option with Warcry. But same build here. Same build that I just showed some gameplay with. Some really easy Kullervo gameplay. Hold left mouse button and press W. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. If you have any questions about it, if you have any recommendations, anything I missed on Okina Prime Incarnon, then let me know in the comment section down below. And thanks for watching.